Hello, everyone. Yeah, thank you very much for coming along today. So my presentation today is going to be looking at some work that I've been doing with my colleagues, Dr. Roxanne Connolly and Professor Vernon Gale at the University of Edinburgh, as part of an SDAI grant. So what I'm fundamentally interested in is thinking about how we go about measuring family social class. Now, historically, when more males were employed, a number of years ago, father's occupation was the way that this was traditionally measured. And then Erikson has described this, where you go about choosing the highest ranked occupation within a family when you have two natural parents. But increasingly, as things have changed over time, we started to think more about that firstly, for both mothers and fathers' position matters, and that this may matter according to different resources. So traditionally, in the kind of work that I do, looking at educational outcomes, often you'll find that a father's occupation is quite relevant and a mother's education level. But what I'm seeking to do today is give you just a taste of what I've been looking at about trying to look at more complex families. So what about other parent figures at this point? So what about situations where you have a natural mother living with a stepfather? And what about non-resident natural parents? So here are some of the different different things that we've been thinking about, such as the increased levels of dual wage earner households. So both parents contributing in that sense to the economic position of the family. And also things like increasing levels of partnership dissolution, as we've been hearing about in previous talks, higher numbers of lone parent households, and more repartnering. So I've just got a little kind of caricature of the kind of typology that we started to think about this through. So I've drawn this up here in a couple of slides. So at the very top, we're going to be exploring these using understanding society, looking wave upon wave or year upon year. And we might say that the examples of stability throughout this period, where a young person growing up has both the mother and their father living in the household with them over time, their natural parents. Or they might just live with one lone parent, typically the mother. But what about examples that I'm describing here, such as, where a two-parent couple then moves to a lone parent household? Or as I've put down the bottom here, where you have a two-parent couple to start with, and then the household becomes a lone parent household, but the adult leaver at that point remains in the study. And various other kind of combinations and permutations. So this top example here is where perhaps you've got a lone parent and then somebody has entered the household, so they've partnered at that point, or anything a bit more complicated than that. So very much the purpose of using understanding society to look at this issue is to do with the challenges that we have in the UK data landscape. So I've included some of the main studies that have been used to look at the backgrounds of young people. And these include some of the older birth cohort studies, but obviously there's some big gaps between when these are conducted. So the BCS 1970 and the Millennium Cohort Study. Then there's the youth cohort study of England and Wales, with lots of rich information in the preceding period at this point. And but this is a cross-sectional study. And then you have next steps and our future. So what we were really seeking to do is to use understanding society to really bridge this data gap that we've got in terms of understanding more about family and household composition at this point. So the way that we went about doing this is to use the youth panel, which is those young people who completed the youth questionnaire between the ages of 11 and 15. And then what we've done is we've derived a parental typology using a number of variables at this point. So many of you may be familiar with these. So we've got the natural father ID, natural mother ID, and then the equivalent for natural step and adopted fathers, and then for mothers. And from that, we've got a relatively simple table, but this hides some of the groundwork that goes into this at this point. So here we have wave A, and we've got the parental typology as I've described it. So it's a 9-category variable that we've constructed based on the kinds of combinations that I've spoken about. And what you'll notice straight away from that is that the top 2 categories, so where a young person is living with their natural father and natural mother, or in just natural mother, these are overwhelmingly the biggest categories at this point. So actually, we have some much more common patterns in our data, and some of the other combinations occur far less frequently at that point. So that's a very simple observation. But one thing we would say is this is partially a kind of data mapping exercise, but also we want to illustrate to others the practicalities of taking some of these steps. When we look at the youth panel over time, those who complete the youth questionnaire, what we notice is that actually quite a substantial number of young people drop out. Now, some of those are because they age out naturally. They go from being 11 to 15, and then they go into the adult survey. But there still remains a big chunk of people who are recorded as having other non-response or not eligible at this point. So you'll see very rapidly that the numbers highlighted in the blue boxes at the top, this group, if we're going to study them using the same variables over time, that sample size gets whittled away very quickly indeed. And so just as an illustration, using our typology, our 9-category typology, what I've just shown you here is a bit of a transition table between waves A and wave B. Now, we've repeated this for every section of the waves that we've looked at through A through to F, but I'll just give you the illustration here. On the diagonal, what you can see is a pattern of stability, essentially. And unusually for me, I've reported raw frequencies here so that we actually get a chance to see the kind of numbers in the data set. But what you very quickly see is that there is quite a high degree of year-to-year stability, as you might expect. And actually, the case numbers, when we start to move away from that diagonal to look at changes in terms of who's living in the household at that point, they very rapidly fall away, and that you actually don't have a lot of cases to work from the original near 5,000 cases. And then I've just included another couple of sort of sub-questions to these analysis. And the first is where I've looked at how well we can follow up situations where natural fathers or natural step-adopted fathers have left the household, and similar for mothers. And you can see that on the right-hand side of this slide. And the main thing I just want to draw your attention to is really, firstly, that the frequencies of parents leaving the household wave to wave are relatively low. They're higher for fathers than they are for mothers. But there is this great challenge that those who leave the household don't tend to respond. And that you can understand why, potentially, that you don't want to respond to a survey at this point. But this is a great challenge, because this is one of the purposes of something like Understanding Society, is the ability to track these people over time. So this is difficult in this area because of these large numbers of people who we're not able to follow up because they haven't done an interview. And then I've got another group of people who I've caricatured as newly resident parents, where we've got somebody who has either joined or rejoined the household. And again, the very simple message I want you to take from this slide is that we're much better at getting information about people who are entering the household than those who are leaving the household in terms of that tracing over time. Admittedly, the numbers are very low in this case, but you'll see that consistently you see that mothers are much more likely to complete this information, which I think is quite, the previous talk was very relevant in this area, talking about the kinds of work that people do. So these are the people who are completing the survey. Whereas you see that, again, there's a chunk of fathers who are entering the household, who are in the survey, who don't do it. So in conclusion to this main part, what I'd really suggest is that there's a few things that we've observed from this work. The first is the high level of attrition from the youth panel that we didn't see so much in the British Household Panel study. This was something that one of my co-authors had previously looked at. There's high levels of interwave stability. There's poor response from parents leaving the household, particularly fathers. And I know that that's something that one of our speakers, Caroline, has looked at in some of her previous research. What does this lead us to conclude in relation to the position of how we establish social class? Well, really, with the evidence we've got on this group of 11 to 15-year-olds using Understanding Society, actually, we don't really have the information to be able to improve upon the dominance measure or using the highest ranked parent at this point because of this small number of cases. And we had all sorts of ideas about how we might allocate social position based on, for example, workload in the family, but that's not really going to be possible with these data. So in my last few slides, what I just briefly want to reflect on is a bit about the work about reproducibility, because that's a bit of a bugbear of us as a group, really. And so what I've really tried to do is put this into a Jupyter notebook. And this is a form of literate programming where essentially what we do is we show the code, we write up what we're doing as we go, and we show the output. Because although these slides I've shown you may seem quite simple, the actual amount of analytical work that's gone in, there's a lot of work goes into this. And we think that this is very important to be able to share some of this along the way, because there normally isn't the space in a journal article. And as an illustration of this kind of challenge, some of the things we did here that I haven't shown you is we were exploring every single transition and looking for consistency in the data, for example. And so what we were able to establish is that, for example, that the relationship status is not stable wave to wave. Now, when we spoke to Understanding Society about this, they pointed out these things to us, but these are things you kind of have to know if you're working with these data. And what we're trying to do is to bring that out into the open, is to show this through the process of recording and documenting this in something like a Jupyter notebook that we want to then make available to people, so that particularly if you're a new user of these data, you won't necessarily know this. It's about building that kind of social science infrastructure and passing on that knowledge to others. So what our plans are at the moment is we've been putting this onto a GitHub repository. This is currently private, but we will make this public, including all the code and the Jupyter notebooks that we're producing as we're doing this piece of work. And then we want to host this on the Open Science Framework, OSF. And we've got a page for this where we've been recording all the other project materials that we're doing as we're going on. And we just think that that's really important as a way of helping others so that we can all improve our research. And on that note, I will just draw things to a close. I very much welcome your questions. Yeah, thank you very much for listening and for your time.